The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good to have you with us again tonight, and good to have Lang Baker with me again tonight. How you doing, Lang?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Wayne?
Oh, okay so far. This is going to be a fully mistake-free show tonight, Lang. I've made myself that promise before going on the air. So far, so good. You guys can call in out there. The listeners can call in at 343-9927. We'd like to hear your thoughts and comments on tonight's topic, which is cop roid rage, and specifically the abuse of anabolic steroids by police officers and any connection there may be between that and some of the aggressive actions we've seen by police officers over the past several years. And Lang, I'd like to start off with an article here from Alternet by David J. Krajicek from 2015. He writes here that in 2004, the growing menace of steroid abuse by American police officers prompted the federal DEA to warn of, quote, possible psychological disturbances, close quote, of juiced-up cops. And they listed a lot of these symptoms that they found: mood swings, including manic-like symptoms leading to violence, impaired judgment stemming from feelings of invincibility, depression, nervousness, extreme irritability, delusions, and hostility and aggression. And then 4 years later, he says, the International Association of Chiefs of Police approved the resolution that calls upon state and local law enforcement entities to establish a model policy prohibiting the use of illegally obtained steroids by officers. And the operative word there, I didn't pick up on that earlier, was illegally obtained steroids. But you want to jump in there on that? Or you,
Yeah, that report by the DEA, that's still available online today. You can find that. It was issued in March of 2004. And it goes through describing the problem and the risks and explaining what anabolic steroids are and why they're abused. According to the DEA, it says that the law enforcement profession is both mentally and physically challenged, and anabolic steroids are a drug of choice because they are known for increasing the size and strength of muscles more quickly and more easily, and increasing one's endurance while performing physical activity. And the DEA says some law enforcement personnel may believe that steroids provide them with a physical and psychological advantage when performing their duties. So that's what the DEA points out as the motivation. And they point out that the source, most common source, is from smuggling, and some are drugs diverted from the authorized medical use stream.
And probably used in greater doses, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
I did want to at least specify what most people mean when they say roid rage. Looking at a WebMD story where they interviewed Dr. Gary Wadler regarding the phenomenon. And it states here, Wadler is a clinical associate professor of medicine at New York University's Medical School. He is an expert on roid rage and also a spokesman for the American College of Sports Medicine, a member of the World Anti-Doping Agency, and author of the textbook Drugs and the Athlete. And he's asked the question here by the interviewer, what is roid rage? And he states here that it's a form of loss of impulse control. It provokes overreactions via a stimulus that normally doesn't produce such a severe reaction. And so he goes on to, they ask him then, could anabolic steroids account for severely violent acts? And he says, yes, it's been implicated in a number of murders and can result in extreme aberrations of behavior, including the taking of one's life. But then he adds here something very important to me, Lang. He says, another thing you have to be mindful of, it may unmask an underlying psychiatric disorder that has been basically kept in check until the individual is exposed to this category of drugs. And so what you may be seeing is actually an unmasked psychiatric disorder rather than the direct effect of the steroid.
Right, which would indicate that the steroid doesn't necessarily cause that kind of behavior or reaction in all individuals.
Yeah, but the feeling of invincibility and the poor judgment and the loss of impulse control, I mean, if you're already having the impulse to beat the heck out of somebody or kill somebody, now you're even less inclined to resist the urge.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting, though, right before, when I got here to the station this afternoon, before we went on the air, I did some more looking on Roid Rage, and I found a site, let me see if I can see the name of it, anabolicsteroids.net is what it's called, and it's a site that provides information for people, athletes, who want to do a hormone therapy for performance enhancement or growing, building muscles and whatnot. And they state here, of course, they're trying to sell the product, so they're going to be biased, just as the media are often biased in trying to be alarmist. But they quote a study from the New England Journal of Medicine where they did a fairly extensive study for 10 weeks where they administered placebos and also anabolic steroids to a large group of young men. I don't recall exactly how many now, but they administered a higher dose than normal, around 600 milligrams of a particular steroid, and they saw no correlation and really no differences in behavior between the men who were treated with the anabolic steroids and those who were giving a placebo. They saw no differences. But so that that casts some doubt on it. But then there's a psychological thing that Dr. Weidler mentioned, and also I'm not sure. There are also some other factors there as far as doses taken too, right?
Right. There'll be a question. It'd be interesting to see the original study because there's indication that the higher the dosage, the greater the potential, and the length of time may be longer than what their study lasted. And then, according to this DEA report, some of the practices that the abusers engage in is one practice called stacking, where they're actually taking multiple kinds of anabolic steroids to increase the effects obtained. And another practice called cycling, where they take the super high doses for a period of a number of weeks and then go a number of weeks without it and then go back on it and back and forth like that to enhance the effect that's achieved.
Right, and you were saying earlier that they have no clinical data on that stuff.
Well, that's also what some of these reports have said, that they don't really have sound clinical data of the high dosages because it would be unethical to perform those kinds of studies.
Right.
To subject people to those super high doses, because there are other kinds of health effects that anabolic steroids cause, and over the long term, it can cause heart damage and increase the potential for stroke and
liver damage, kidney damage.
Right,
all
there's
kinds
a variety
of
other health effects.
Weren't testicular cancer? Isn't that one of them that was a side effect of taking some of the steroids, anabolic steroids?
I don't recall whether it was in the list. It may be.
Okay.
I know they said shrinkage of the testes is one.
Okay. And we've been talking about anabolic steroids. What other kinds are there?
There's the corticoid steroids, which are this expert you quoted earlier said he advised against ever using the word steroids because these two classes of steroids are greatly different in the approved medical uses, the functions, the effects that they produce, and it can alarm people who are properly on medical supervision for the corticosteroids to think that the stories they're hearing about steroids, when they're actually meaning the anabolic steroids might be something for them to worry about, where there are harmful side effects that are potential with the corticosteroids. They're different.
Okay, so that they're mainly concerned with, I guess, probably with the hype associated with so-called roid rage, that there will be confusion about which kind is what, and it could have adverse effects even in the legitimate use of the drugs.
Right.
As far as people deciding to take them or not.
Right.
Okay. Did you mention the corticosteroids? They break down tissue according to this. They actually are used for anti-inflammatory effects and things like that. So they can actually cause muscle weakness, according to Dr. Weidler.
Yeah, that's right. There was in one of the other questions in his interview, he was asked to explain the difference between the anabolic and the corticosteroids. And it explained that the corticosteroids have the kinds of effects you're taking, that they may have side effects, but they're quite different.
Yeah, but here, again, that just highlights the fact that we are talking about two different kinds of steroid general categories.
Right, and the anabolic steroids are a synthetic steroid, whereas there is a natural steroid that's produced. It's the hormone testosterone.
Right.
And that's what some of the athletes take, artificial supplements of testosterone. That it's a natural steroid that the body produces.
Right.
And then there's the anabolic steroids, and then there are designer steroids, which have cropped up that have no approved medical use, and they were designed to avoid being detected in drug tests. So you've got that issue.
That actually plays to the reason why many police departments gave up random testing for steroids, because a lot of the illegal steroids, anabolic steroids they're using, are designed specifically. Number one, they are illegal drugs taken in huge doses, and they are designed specifically now to avoid detection. You're listening to Wayne Parker and Lang Baker on a Pause for Thought. Feel free to call in. We're talking about roid rage and the distinctions between the two different kinds of steroids, or maybe there's three. Lang, you confused me there for a second. But you can call in at 343-9927, 343-9927. We'd like to hear what you have to say about these issues here. Lang, you mentioned there's the anabolic steroids. There's, I'm going to say it right, corticosteroids, yes, and testosterone.
Well, testosterone is a natural anabolic steroid.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And actually, the full name is anabolic androgen steroids. The anabolic part refers to the effect on the muscles, and the androgen part of the name refers to the effect of traits associated with the sex.
Okay, and getting back to this alternate article I have, he come up with some examples of cops exhibiting rage. He doesn't say roid rage, but he says rage, or aggression and or poor judgment, which he reminds us is all our symptoms of possible steroid abuse. And they've exhibited these behaviors in confrontations with citizens. July 17th, Eric Garner was strangled by a chokehold applied by New York City police officer Daniel Pantaleo. Freddie Gray was trussed up and bundled into the back of a police van where he suffered fatal injuries from the rough ride the police were giving him, which I'm sure is just an anomaly. June 6th, there was Officer Eric Casebolt unholstered his sidearm when dealing with some teenagers outside a pool in McKinney, Texas. On July 10th, Trooper Brian Encina in Houston, Texas, ordered Sandra Bland out of her car, and I saw the footage of this, by screaming at her, "Get out of the car, I will light you up."
Right, I remember that video.
And good grief, And anyhow, and then there's the killing July 19th of Samuel DeBose in Ohio during a routine traffic stop by University of Cincinnati police officer Ray Tenzing, who has been charged with murder. And the shooting death August 7th of Christian Taylor by Officer Brad Miller, who was fired, but not prosecuted for murder, but whatever. And then, of course, there's Alton Sterling here in Baton Rouge. We don't really know anything yet. We just happen to know what we don't know. And I'd like to get into a little bit of the East Baton Rouge Parish Code of Ordinances regarding drug testing of police officers. But also, I just have to mention that we still don't know anything about how both officers' body cams fell off their uniforms and managed to not record anything, as far as we know. I mean, they could have given a close up of a cigarette butt or a candy wrapper on the ground, but we don't have anything, or we don't know of anything. And we don't know yet either, as far as I know, at least I could not find that out before airing tonight, if the officers involved in the shooting were tested for anabolic steroids after the incident. And according to the ordinances that I've read, and I happen to have here, they are required to have been tested for anabolic steroids. I'm looking at Chapter 8 of the East Baton Rouge Parish Code of Ordinances. It's titled Drug-Free Workforce, and it starts off with a list of purposes of the chapter, and I only kept number 8, which was relevant to this discussion, and that is to investigate possible individual employee impairment in the workplace. And then in the section on prohibitions and requirements of this chapter, they they have a heading titled Use of Drugs and Alcohol. All city parish employees are also prohibited from working or reporting for work under the influence of any drug or with a sufficient amount of any drug or metabolite, I guess is the word, thereof in their systems to result in a positive test as defined in subsection The drug was unless the drug was obtained directly or pursuant to a valid prescription or order from a practitioner as provided in Louisiana Uniform Controlled Dangerous Substances Law, and unless the employee is using the drug in a manner consistent with such prescription or order. And then it goes on to list some definitions, and they define drug as, and the first one they say is anabolic steroids. Oh no, anabolic steroids was one of a number of drugs listed, like marijuana and cocaine. But then you say anabolic steroids, which include all substances listed as such in the Federal Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Law and several other legal documents. And then it comes down for testing, enforcement of this chapter, and then subsection A is general. In order to enforce the prohibitions of this chapter against drugs and alcohol in the city parish workplace, the city parish may, and one of the things they may do is perform drug and alcohol testing of city parish employees following serious incidents. And they define serious incidents, and again a list of things, but here the one I called out was any occurrence involving a city parish employee in the city parish workplace which one results in one or more deaths or results in bodily injury to any person who, as a result of the injury, immediately receives medical treatment away from the scene of the accident or receives professional medical treatment beyond first aid, or results any incident that results in damage to property which renders the property inoperable, and the discharge by an employee of a firearm while in the furtherance of his or her duties of city parish government, regardless of whether the firearm was discharged during the employee's normal duty hours. So this all says to me that the police involved with Alton Sterling's death should have been tested for anabolic steroids, and I guess that's just a question we hope will get answered.
I believe back when you first started reading, it says city parish may.
Right, may. That's a good point. So they're not required to. Yeah.
That's what may would indicate, yeah.
I didn't pick up on that, but yeah.
They're authorized to, but that's not a requirement.
It's not a requirement at all, no. However, if we can trust outside organizations, assuming that the city parish, didn't enforce these things or do these tests, they still have to comply with the higher regulations of the FDA and DEA and all those. So they could set themselves up for prosecution if they did not administer the tests, it seems to me. I'm not a lawyer.
I don't know whether the DEA, do you have a copy of the higher authority
No, I don't.
requirement?
But it does say in here that, all this is put out in order to ensure that they conform to those laws. But, yeah,
So-
you're right. There might be some.
So the law, if it does conform to the law, that would indicate the law makes it discretionary as well, saying that they may do it.
Oh, good point. Yeah. So, yeah, there's no guarantee, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. The question would be what that other law that they're attempting to comply with
Right.
requires. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
And if they're designer anabolic steroids designed not to be detectable in a test, then doing a test wouldn't make any difference anyway.
right. In fact, that reminds me of the story from the Phoenix, Arizona Police Department. This is from the Republic of Arizona by Megan Cassidy in 2015, July 8th of 2015. It carries the headline, Phoenix Police Terminate Random Steroids Testing. And she leads off with stating that the Phoenix Police pioneered an anti-doping policy that took hold in police agencies across the country when the department implemented random steroid testing 9 years ago. And this was implemented because of a drug enforcement. It states here that their policy became particularly relevant in 2007 when police and firefighters across the valley were swept up in a U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration probe into doctors improperly passing out prescriptions. At least 12 Phoenix officers and 12 firefighters were linked to the investigation. So, I mean, according to this article here, it started off where they began really going great guns, all departments all over the country doing random testing. But then it says here, the program quietly dissolved in 2014, and police say sworn officers are now only tested for the substance on a for-cause basis.
Which is what the Baton Rouge ordinance
Right, which is
was
what Baton Rouge
saying,
is, yeah.
For cause.
They did say something about reasonable suspicion, too, but I didn't want to get too far into all that boring stuff. Yeah, and there were a couple things that are the problem. Like you mentioned, there are designer drugs now that were intended or specifically designed to avoid detection on the tests. There are also so many legitimate uses for hormone treatment now being used by the medical, community, that they were getting a lot of guys that had legitimate reasons for using them, and then of course the steroids would show up in their bloodstream or their urine, and it became inefficient and ineffective, really. Plus, it was very, very expensive.
Right.
It says here in this article, costs associated with additional drug testing in a cash-strapped agency were at the root of the program's termination in Phoenix, Arizona. A urine sample can be tested for marijuana, Valium, meth, and a host of other illegal substances at about $10 per test. But steroid screening is run through a separate process called liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. I got it wrong. Spectrometry, and it is as much as 10 to 20 times more expensive. And so they just said, well, let's just get rid of that. It's not effective anyway, because of all these other factors, and it costs a lot of money. So they just went to something a little bit less expensive,
Yeah, well, it was wasted money if it wasn't going to affect anything.
No, yeah,
anyway.
I don't blame them. I mean, I wouldn't want them spending that kind of money here in Baton Rouge just for show,
Right.
Yeah.
So what the DEA recommended back in 2004 was an aggressive education program about the dangers and health threats that are posed by abusing this drug. And I'll be curious to know whether that's part of the police training here locally to educate the officers about the potential damage to their livers and their hearts and having strokes and stuff like that from this drug.
Yeah, and I have to wonder, too, having been a young man once, if it would matter.
You just don't know. I mean, it can change the culture even if it doesn't affect everybody, and it can perhaps have some impact even if it doesn't affect everybody. And if these people have families and the education program goes to the families as well, then there's a strengthening of the family awareness, monitoring.
Right, good point. The wives will definitely keep after their men if they know the dangers of it and they know their husbands are using
Yeah,
them.
and actually, I think that a much better public education program across the board for the general public about the dangers of not just these drugs, but
Yeah,
a lot of risks in our culture.
yes, and forgive my
Well,
crestfallen look when you said that, because isn't the lack of education about important things like that one of the biggest problems in humanity, really?
well, I can remember. I don't know if it was accurate or not, but it was said back at the time when they first started the anti-smoking public service announcements on TV that they were so effective that the tobacco companies started coming around to agreeing to banning ads on TV so they wouldn't have the anti-smoking ads on there as well.
Right. Yeah, and I guess, and they've succeeded largely in changing the public view of cigarette smoking in
It had
America.
big
I mean,
impact.
there's been a huge impact. You're correct. So, yeah, I suppose it's possible. I can recall the anti-littering campaigns on TV when I was a kid. They don't seem to have much effect around here, though, from what I've seen. But probably
I haven't seen any anti-littering ads around here.
Well, good point.
either.
That may be why there's no effect, right? Because they don't have any anymore. But you're listening to Wayne Parker with Lang Baker. With a pause for thought here, we're talking about roid rage, especially with police departments. And you know, Lang, one of the journalists here, he's an activist for enforcement of drug testing for anabolic steroids with police, and he's saying that it's basically turning into, or has become, a see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil policy about the anabolic steroids. But it's so difficult to really nail anything down specifically about so-called roid rage. What else can departments do? I mean, it sure appears to be a problem, but what can we do?
Yeah, well, right. There's a question of whether you can actually establish that it's a real thing, and to what extent it plays a role in particular incidents. But that's like, why do you have to have the evidence if you know there are other bad health effects?
Yeah.
Bad
true,
consequences of this abuse.
I'm talking about if a cop commits an abuse against someone or kills somebody, they can't really go after him for roid rage. However, I guess the way to go would be to just base your legal decisions on what they did. I mean, if you see the evidence, if you see the videotape, and through a thorough investigation discover that the cops killed somebody unjustifiably or provoked the incident, then you could discipline them for that.
Right. If you look at the conduct in the surrounding circumstances and what's the proper course of action to either discipline or not, or to prosecute or not.
Of course, a lot of times,
given what's objectively observable. I mean, the question of whether anabolic steroids were involved would be
moot.
It would be moot in making that initial decision, and then it might play a role if it came to trial. And then the question would be, well, is it the defense that's going to want to try to establish that was an excusable cause, that
Right.
he didn't really have control, and then the shoe's on the other foot on trying to prove that there was in fact roid rage.
Yeah. So, basing it on the action itself would remove at least that much ambiguity. But of course, if police are going to turn off their body cameras, or if they're going to fall off their bodies very easily, or their camcorders, then it's tough to get decent evidence, I guess, of things like that.
Yeah, then it comes down to who the witnesses were and who the jury's going to believe from that witness stand in the trial.
Okay, well, Lang, we are about out of time. I'd like to thank you for coming on. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. You've been listening to A Pause for Thought with Wayne Parker and Lang Baker talking about roid rage. Next week we're going to talk about sanctuary cities, what they are, and should we take them seriously? What are they all about? Anyway, thank you for listening. We've got to go. Have a good evening.